All right, this is Ricky,
And this is Brendan.
and you're listening to A Gentleman's Disagreement.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. Folks of different minds, because even though it did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.
All right, Brendan, it is Thursday, November the 7th, twice in 1 week. I'm a little less, perhaps a little less sour than I was the day before, and certainly happier now that I get to see you, buddy. And then I have a little bit of a Millie update for you.
Yes,
Been
people
a
love
bit
these. I love
since you
these.
saw her. She is crawling now. Not like we're not like, breaking any land speed records, but we are full on moving from one side of the room to the other in a relatively linear fashion. And it's been very interesting to see the development here.
I'm surprised that she didn't just go to start walking. She's just I'm surprised she's just not out in the world right now.
I mean, she's got more hair than she probably should. She definitely has more teeth than she probably should. But the crawling thing has been interesting because if you asked either of our parents, either my parents or Ginny's parents, they've witnessed her crawl many times. But like Ginny, I'm like, no, we're there too. She's like, she kind of rolls in a circle. She kind of like she can move from one area to another, but doesn't really seem like she's in control of where she's going. Now she's very much like, oh, my right hand, if I put that one forward and then the left one
That's kind
goes,
of cool.
then the foot goes, and we're moving. So, um,
Did she get into like so my nephew, he's just turned a year last week, so he just started walking. But when he was first starting to crawl, he was in this like almost like he would rev himself up, but he couldn't go anywhere. He kept pushing himself backwards, and he was like so frustrated. He'd start crying because he's like wants to go forward, he's trying to do it, but couldn't figure out, and he would just go backwards like until he got to the wall, which was like adorable, but also like so sad for him. Has she gone through that at all?
that was her number one move. She would be like, yeah, feet, hands in front of the other, and then a lot of rocking, but the motion was only taking her in one direction, and that was backwards.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah, she'd end up pushed up against something and then just like totally confused. I'm here. I wanted to go there. I need to be
Yeah.
standing. I think I'm further away. So that was yeah, that was an interesting stage to follow. Most of it, I'd say to her credit, wasn't like a ton of like angry frustration, just a bit of bewilderment. Like
Yeah.
I think I'm going forward, but it appears that I'm going
It
back.
appears that I am not. Yeah.
Which I mean,
That's
that's kind of a metaphor for a lot of things, isn't it?
You stole it. We're stolen out of my mouth. Well done. Yeah.
With that, what are we talking about tonight?
Super excited. We have Patrick Rosenstiel coming on, who is the head of, or one of the heads of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Uh, People may have heard of this, may not have. We'll obviously get into it much more when he comes on. But essentially, this is a movement to, on the state level, vote to commit your state's electors to whomever of the presidential candidates wins the popular vote. So this would kind of replace the electoral college, and instead of determining the winner of the presidential election by who won the most electoral votes, it would be by who won the national popular vote. We timed this up after, so we had planned this, obviously we booked this a couple weeks ago, and we didn't know how the election was going to come out. There was certainly a possibility that whoever won the popular vote would not win the electoral college and become the president-elect. That's not what happened. Uh, in some ways, I think that's more interesting to talk about, given what's happened over these last three elections now, or even the last eight, six, seven, eight elections. So whatever, I'm really excited. Patrick is the foremost expert in the field. He is the leader of this movement in the United States, and he's here to, I guess, in some ways, probably pitch us on this idea of the national popular vote. And so we're really lucky to have him on, and excited to talk to him.
Yeah, can't wait.
All right, before we bring Patrick on, a reminder to everyone the podcast is brought to you by the hardworking craftsmen over at Cannon Hill Woodworking. They've been building handcrafted, high-end custom tables in Destin, Boston, 2018. That's Cannon with two N's. You can check them out on Instagram or visit them online at www.cannonhillwood.com. Ricky, in some ways, the national popular vote movement is, they're kind of innovating, right? When one thing doesn't work, they want to go do something else. So, what did the tree do when its bank closed?
It leave.
It started its own branch.
Ah, I think we had a branch call last time. I was trying to branch out.
Ah, oh, okay. There you go. Try. You're so quick, right? All right. Let's bring Patrick on. All right. We are now thrilled to welcome Patrick Rosenstiel onto the program. Patrick is a Republican and a business community political operative who is currently working as the CEO of Ainsley Shea, which is a Twin Cities, Minnesota-based public affairs firm. He is also the chairman of the Center Left Institute for Research on Presidential Elections and its advocacy arm, the National Popular Vote, which is a movement to end run the Electoral College without a constitutional amendment. That's me editorializing a little bit. We'll get into
That
that, I'm
would not be
sure.
my description, but
Yeah,
okay, go
totally
ahead.
fair.
Yeah.
Rosenstiel was he was a former campaign aide for the 1996 Republican presidential candidate Steve Forbes, and he is the former executive director of the Trade Alliance to Promote Prosperity. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, grateful to be here. Thanks for making the time.
All right, so my first question is, and doing some research I didn't quite put in that bio, you are a member of the Federalist Society.
No, I'm not a member of the Federalist Society, but I've been a supporter of the Federalist Society. I've debated in front of and spoke to the Federalist Society on many different occasions, and I love the Federalist Society. I'm a Federalist. I'm not a selective Federalist. I believe in the separation of powers between the federal and state government, and that's why I chuckled at your Enron comment a
Well,
little
all
bit.
right. Well, so
Go
that's
ahead.
this is my exact question, right? As I
Yeah.
am also a Federalist myself, and so theoretically, one of the things that I think we would potentially agree on is like the importance the how sacred the Constitution is, right? And we lay out in the Constitution a way to elect our president.
Yeah.
Tell me
That's where I
why are
began.
you doubting? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so federalism means separation of powers between branches of government, right? So I think definitions matter. And so
Sure.
in a federalist government, there are federal powers and there are state powers. And if you read the Constitution and not just waive it, and I'm not accusing you of waiving it, but if you read Article 2, Section 1, it says each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. That's the 17 words around electing a president. And so what the founders did is they left it to the state legislature to determine how they're going to award presidential electors. They didn't determine how presidential elections were going to be run. They left that up to the states through the power to award electors. And so, national popular vote, we have an interstate compact that states if they want to award their electors on the basis of the national popular vote. And so far, 17 states and the District of Columbia have used their state power under the Constitution to award their electors or join the national popular vote interstate compact. Now, that totals 209 electoral votes. And a federalist can support a national popular vote interstate compact that takes effect when states with 270 electors pass it. So it's the ultimate exercise of state powers for them to either keep their state-based winner-take-all law, which is nowhere in the United States Constitution. States adopted statutes with the power that I just described, right? It's a fully federalist move to adopt the national popular vote interstate compact because they want to make their voters relevant in presidential elections. And so a national popular vote for president through the interstate compact is absolutely an act of federalism, and it's a sovereign act of each state to determine how they're going to award their electors. So, as a federalist, I support the national popular vote interstate compact because I want every voter in every state to be politically relevant in every presidential election. And I recognize that the founders left it to the legislature to determine how they're going to award their electors so that they can change the system and better represent the interests of their states in electing a president. So, I don't want to get too deep into the minutes of the Constitutional Convention, but trust me when I say a Federalist, as a guy who helped, I don't know, confirm, Alito and Roberts to the bench, a Federalist can support the national popular vote interstate compact because you happen to be talking to one of them.
Well, I mean, that was really exactly my question. So that was a
Sure.
phenomenal, no, phenomenal answer for it. Because to your point, I guess there is a lot of state power in the sense that they're doing what's best for their states, even if what their state kind of wants isn't necessarily reflected in how they distribute their electors. In the sense that like a state could the state vote popularly could be for one candidate, but if the national vote is the other way, then the electors would go to the other candidate.
Yeah, the problem we're fixing is that 4 out of 5 American voters are left on the political sideline when we elect a president of the United States. So you happen to be talking to a Republican, conservative Republican at that, who's trapped behind the blue wall in Minnesota. Okay, my state's
I'm in
the state.
Massachusetts. That's
Okay, cool.
it's a
So
worse
you and I are the
situation.
same. We're the same person.
Yeah.
Okay, my state. The only way we're different is my state is the only state that voted for Walter Mondale. So I got you beat by a little
Well,
bit.
he was from there. It's
Okay, but all I'm saying is in my entire lifetime as a Republican trapped behind the blue wall, my participation in a presidential election has been absolutely meaningless, not because, I didn't get an elector for it, but because I'm totally ignored in presidential elections, right? I'm a flyover state, just like you live in a flyover state in Massachusetts. And if you think back 2 days ago, you would have noticed that we were electing a governor basically in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona. 7 states are the only thing they talked about during the entire presidential election. 94% of the general election visits from both major parties, 94% of them were just in 12 states. 38 states were basically ignored as candidates ran for president of the United States. Now that translates into political power. So the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says to me, look, we want to make every voter in every state relevant in every presidential election. Flyover states should not be ceding their political power to battleground state voters. And I don't think that's an overly controversial idea. It's certainly not one that the founders prohibited us from considering and discussing. And I think that's why states are taking us up on the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. And it's not a theory. I mean, it is a political movement. It's been adopted by 17 states in the District of Columbia. It's passed one chamber or another in 7 additional states with 74 electoral votes, more than the 61 electoral votes required for it to take effect. So I think we just watched the last presidential election where 4 out of 5 American voters are ignored and where a Republican like you and me, trapped behind the blue wall, or a Democrat in Oklahoma, those people should matter in presidential elections too. They shouldn't be ignored. We should be electing a president of the United States, not the battleground states. Now, how does that impact the entire political ecosystem? Well, whether or not you matter in a presidential election is a proxy for political influence with the president. So, for example, when I worked with the Bush administration, after I got done with Forbes, I supported the Republican administration. I mean, we passed a $1 trillion prescription drug bill to lock in the I-4 corridor of Florida because what Florida voters wanted, they were going to get, right? Because we needed to lock in a battleground state. And so, the current system, I can't think of a single redeeming quality to it. It makes 1 out of 5 voters hyper relevant to governing presidents, while the rest of us don't matter. And I just believe in pluralism. This idea that one person, one vote should govern presidential elections. It's a foundational principle of the American democracy. And it's not a Republican, Democrat, or independent idea. It's a sort of uniquely American idea, and it's time that we have one.
So obviously this movement got picked up a decent amount of steam after the 2000 election when Bush won the Electoral College, didn't win the popular vote. In looking at the states that you've got, like the 17 or so that you listed, I think all of them are Democrat leaning, if not strongly Democratic, strongly like Democrat states. How do you pitch this to Republicans who are constantly worried about the diminishing of the, like maybe the Republican voter base? Obviously, you didn't see that in this election, which is kind of why I was telling Brendan, I think this is now a good time to have this discussion. But like, obviously in 2016 and in 2020, losing the popular vote twice, this like narrative about immigrants coming in, especially in blue states potentially, and like just like, reducing the just number of Republican voters out there. I guess how do you pitch this when you're talking to Republicans?
Well, I think there are more Republican voters than Democratic voters in America, and I think that was proved on Tuesday night in spades. I mean, the truth is, when we're not afraid of the voters or afraid of our ideas, Republicans can win under any system, and I think that was proved. And we can develop a message of resonance to any voter. So you're right to point out that the 17 states in the District of Columbia look like blue states, but it was Republicans that delivered the winning margins in every one of those states. And to just look at the enacting states ignores a couple of facts about the national popular vote interstate compact. One is New York. When we got New York in the interstate compact, it was the Republican Senate that moved our bill before the Democratic House would move it. Because look, if you're a conservative in Long Island, on presidential election days, you can stay home and clean your gutters. You know what I mean? You know that the Democrat is going to win New York before you even know who the nominee is. Now, how much you win or lose New York by, if that becomes politically important in presidential elections, I can promise you're going to have get out the vote efforts until the polls are closed on by Republican and conservative parties and candidates, just like you will Democratic candidates, right? So it ignores the fact that the New York Senate was Republican controlled when we passed our bill. It ignores the fact that the Oklahoma Senate passed the national popular vote interstate compact and the House did not move the bill. It ignores the fact that Arizona, we passed the House with 2/3 Republicans and Democrats working together in 2018, 2 years after the divergent election. We had 15 Republican senators and 10 Democratic senators in the state of Michigan as co-sponsors on the national popular vote bill. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about election reform in legislatures, but I don't think we can find another single reform since maybe well, even then, the Voting Rights Act. I don't think you could find 10 Democrats to support it. In Congress, it's very hard to find that kind of bipartisan support. And the reason that we have bipartisan support everywhere we go is because it's not a partisan issue. It's not as simple as looking at a map. It's like, do you believe that when we all have the same at stake in presidential elections, that we can have a better politics, a better discourse? Sort of, the driving motivation of your podcast is to have, people who disagree come together, fight like hell, you know what I mean, until the election is over and then live with the results, right? And I think a national popular vote for president will do more to improve our politics than any single reform in the history of my lifetime. Like, because we're not going to be thinking about whether we live in a red state or a blue state. We're going to be thinking about who is the candidate that has a message that appeals to us. We're going to go out and vote. We're going to matter. Our candidate's either going to win or lose. And we're not going to have to put National Guard around the Capitol or board up major American cities, because a court is more likely to pick a president in a battleground state than any single voter. That's what's leading to the trauma in American politics. And, I think Saturday Night Live is funny, but I'm for ending the trauma. You know what I mean? I'm totally for ending the trauma. That's why I'm for national popular vote. And I think you're seeing unfold before your very eyes right now what it's like when a candidate has the full-throated support of the most American voters, right? Because I don't think the peaceful transition of power has anything to do with the person. I think it has to do with the system. And our system that we use right now is designed for courts to pick presidents in battleground states, right? Anytime it is close. When there's a national popular vote winner, there's no question but that Donald Trump won and is the legitimately elected leader to move the country forward for the next 4 years. And you can like that or you can hate that, but you can't call him illegitimate like I think the Democrats did for 4 years after the 2016 elections. So I'm for the American president having the bully pulpit of the most American voters to lead this country into the future. And when my candidate wins, I'm happy. When my candidate doesn't win, I'm happy. because I know I mattered. And that is a big deal when it comes to American democracy. It's our greatest experiment and is the greatest contribution we make to the world. It should govern our presidential elections, this idea of one person, one vote.
I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, I think the argument makes a lot of sense, and the bipartisan appeal makes sense to me. I guess what I'm thinking, what I want to know is what are the Republican states that are gonna enact this?
Look, there are plenty of Republican states that, honestly, if the 2016 presidential election was not a divergent election, and you're right to point out that divergent elections create headwinds. Frankly, most of my problems prior to the 2016 elections was not with Republican leaders in Republican chambers. It was with Democrats who constantly point to Texas like it's going to give them a lock on the electoral college. Well, how did that work in the 2016 election, right? Like pundits, I don't spend a ton of time trying to convince pundits of anything, because the one thing I know about pundits is they're not allowed to say I don't know. You know what I mean? They got to pretend like they're experts at everything. I promise you, I'm an expert on this topic. And it's by way more than 2,000 hours, right? Like I know the Constitution, I know the Electoral College, I know state-based winner-take-all laws. I know how campaigns are built to be won under state-based winner-take-all laws versus first-past-the-post systems, not because I read about it in a book, but because I lived it. It's what I did for a living. You know what I mean? Like I totally understand everything I'm talking about here. What I do know is when you have a first past the post system, candidate with the most votes wins in a single member district, in this case, the United States of America, there isn't a single voter that you can get that you ignore, not one, right? And so every voter is treated equally in that kind of system. Every candidate campaigns and develops issues that will resonate with their winning coalition. One candidate will win, one candidate will lose, but there will not be a lot of controversy around it. I mean, that is the fact. I've never once seen the National Guard surround a state capitol in a governor's race. Never once, because it's a first past the post system where if I'm a rural, Democrat in northern Minnesota or a Republican in the middle of Minneapolis, St. Paul, I knew I went to the polls. I knew I cast my ballots. I knew they had more votes, and sometimes they don't. Right? I've elected Republican governors in Minnesota. One ran for president, right? His name was Tim Pawlenty. Well, these people who say, oh, in a national popular vote, the big cities are going to control everything. Well, then tell me why Tim Pawlenty was elected governor and reelected governor. Because in the state of Minnesota, he didn't carry Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, Mankato, Duluth, or Bloomington. 6 largest cities in Minnesota. Well, he did it by building a winning coalition on the Iron Range, carving into Democratic margins, right? So you go to the voters you need to win, and every voter, rural, urban, ex-urban, suburban, we're not looking at what precincts are in, from Erie County, like we're running a president in a presidential race. We're looking at, okay, hang on a second. This is a pretty close race. Maybe everybody in the lower 48 should be on the phones calling every voter in Alaska and Hawaii, trying to find every vote possible to try to win this race. What's so controversial about that? Why is that not a good idea? And so too many people try to view this through the frame of politics. I have never had a hard time convincing a Republican to support the national popular vote bill, who thinks politics is broken, who's not afraid of the voters, and not afraid of their ideas. And I tell my Republican friends all the time, if you're afraid of the voters and your ideas, maybe find a new line of work. You're probably not cut out for this, right? And I think that's true. I think Donald Trump is not afraid of the voters, and I think he's not afraid of his ideas. And I think Donald Trump has been pretty clear over the years that he supports a national popular vote for president. And he always used to say, I support a national popular vote for president because I think I can win a lot of votes in New York and California. You know what he did? He proved that on Tuesday. Right? I mean, he proved it on Tuesday that he could do that. And he didn't even run campaigns. Imagine if he was running campaigns there to turn out votes and to organize voters and stuff like that. Now, I don't think a national popular vote for president is better for Republicans than it is for Democrats, or better for Democrats than it is for Republicans. And that's not what this is about. It's about improving our politics. And there's one way to do it. and there's one way to do it in the best way possible, right? That will do the most good for the most voters. And it's the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which is the plan at nationalpopularvote.com.
So when you started out with the criticisms of the current system, you said that really only 7 states mattered. They dominated the vast majority of media coverage. They dominated, you said 94% of the visits went to those states. Totally fair. If we did get to a national popular vote, why wouldn't California, Texas, Florida, and New York dominate the media coverage and dominate the visits in the same way?
A bit, well, because I mean, you just said it, right? For every California, there's a Texas. For every New York, there's a Florida, right? Florida's becoming a red state with lots of Republican voters. New York is a blue state with lots of Democratic voters. There are lots of Republican voters in New York and lots of Democratic voters in Florida. There are lots of Republican voters in California, lots of Democratic voters in California, and same is true for Texas. So in the end, you can't if you just campaigned in those states and ignored what is left, 46 states, you would never do that. You wouldn't do that any more than when Mitt Romney was elected in the state of Massachusetts, right? Did he just hunker down in Boston and Worcester? No, I mean he campaigned all over the state of Massachusetts, right? So the same analogy kind of extends to
Yeah,
the
I mean
United States.
it doesn't though, right? Like there you know better than we do that there are limits, right? There are certain like
Now there are no limits.
but there are certain resources of time and money like you just can't spend every.
There are no limit. I mean, right now you pay about a 7,000% premium on any kind of political activity in a battleground state because it's the only place you're spending your money. So the simple law of supply and demand is you have small supply in 7 states. So you drive the price of campaigning up in those states. There are plenty of resources and plenty of time to pay attention to and campaign to every voter in every state. And more importantly, for example, under the current system, flyover state voters, right? Those voters in 4 out of 5 states. There are more voters that have more in common with the three of us than any battleground state voter. And what we do is we export our political capital every 4 years, whether that's our time, our talent, our treasure, to try to turn out battleground state voters, right? You ever watch Curb Your Enthusiasm? You ever watch that show? You know that great little line where Larry David is like, he says, "Okay, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat. Let's get out of line. We don't need to vote. That's kind of our way to vote. We don't want to stand in this line." Well, the truth is there are people in presidential years that say, "Hey, you vote for my candidate in the battleground state, I'll vote for your," right? Like you can see how that would happen. In the end, what it will do is it will keep our political resources in our states fighting for every voter in every precinct in our home state. So, for example, in California, they sent $634 million to the 2 presidential campaigns in the year 2012, right? $634 million was exported out of California into the battleground states, and they got $590 worth back in television ads in one major donor's precinct. Okay. So that's all money that goes out of California. We were an exporter, Massachusetts, exporter of political economy every 4 years, where if you go to your phone bank in New Hampshire's a battleground state, you're making get out the vote calls from Massachusetts into New Hampshire. A national popular vote for president, every phone bank in Massachusetts will be calling Massachusetts voters, organizing their vote to affect their precincts, to support their down ballot tickets. So I don't even, there is no shortage of resources. There is no limits to what we can do inside our own states to convince the people that are like-minded or our peers to vote for our candidates, right? And our activity will stay at home in a national popular vote. Right now, we export all that activity. I promise you, they spent more money on presidential campaigns than Coca-Cola spends on advertising in a year. Well, here's the deal. Coca-Cola does not have a problem driving its message or brand to voters in all 50 states for less money than these presidential campaigns do. Plenty of money. The problem is the concentration of money in battleground states where you're paying a whole bunch of money on TV. You got special interests trying to buy precinct votes to flip a battleground state. The solution to pollution is dilution, right? And the bottom line is you will reallocate every resource to talk to every voter in every state. So in the end, plenty of resources, and the most important one will become the most important one, which is your and my political advocacy with our neighbors, telling them why we think this is the best future for America. And I will just say, Ricky and some of my other colleagues, they'll be doing the same thing. They'll be having the most important people will be having the most important discussions with the most important people, trying to convince them what is in the best interest of the American people. And there's nothing but beauty about that. Right now, it's like, dude, how many lawsuits were there in the lead up to the 2024 presidential elections about whether or not people should be purged from voter files, right? Or, whether or not they should be prosecuted, right? And where were they? They were all in North Carolina. They were all in Georgia. They were all in Pennsylvania. They were all in Michigan. That's where they all were, right? Boy, that's a lot of wasted resources.
So
that could be used to have conversations with American voters in a positive, proactive way, maybe leading to a better politics. And I would say almost certainly leading to a better politics. So go ahead. I'm sorry. I'll get off my soapbox. I got a little too heated.
No,
That's why you're here.
Not at all. That's exactly right. I think one of the things that Brendan and I talk about is, there's been a much to do in the last couple of elections about sort of, record turnout year over year. But I think we're at somewhere around 150 million-ish, give or take a couple, out of maybe an eligible voter pool of like 220 million people. Have you guys put any numbers around what basically making everybody's vote count for something might do to voter turnout?
Yeah, for sure. And it's not even anecdotal. You know what I mean? I mean, it's real research, and I would point you to Fair Vote's research on it. I think they do good research and analysis. It's the stuff I believe best. Fair Vote knows that turnout on average is 11 to 15% higher, depending on what year you look at, right? 11 to 15% higher in battleground states than flyover states. Okay. 4 out of 5 voters live in flyover states. 1 out of 5 voters turn out at 11 to 15% more. So you know that when voters feel like their votes are valued. And what I don't even want to call the most important election, because I actually think who my city council person is more important, and I'm not very happy with them right now. But in the end, I think those people are way more important at the level of my life than who's president of the United States. But I will say in the brand standard election, right, what most people confuse for the most important election, right? Turnout in battleground states is 11 to 15% points higher in a battleground state than it is a flyover state. So if you're interested in more participation, and I, as a Republican, a conservative Republican at that, am interested in more participation. I think every American citizen should turn out to vote every year, and we should count them. And I'm not afraid of that scenario under any circumstance, right? But if you want more participation in American politics, there is one single reform that will do more to improve participation, more to improve turnout rates in all 50 states. And it is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. If you believe that participation is the most important thing in American politics, there is only one reform for you to spend your time on till it's done and then go find another one. It's the only reason I continue to work on national popular vote is because I believe every American voter should feel valued, and not just feel valued, but be valued, and that will increase participation. So we'll all have a shared experience, right? And an equal voice in presidential elections. And that's why I'm a one-trick pony. Like, I'm not into, I got a lot of friends who talk to me about ranked choice voting, blah, 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 and this, that, and the other thing, and this, because they think I'm a reformer. I can promise you I'm not a reformer. I'm a conservative guy. You know what I mean? I'm for reforms that make sense. I'm for school vouchers. You know what I mean? Money should follow the kids. Sometimes I got to fight my Republican colleagues on that too, to be honest. And sometimes my best allies are progressive Democrats on that. I'm a conservative guy. I got the same golf shoes for 8 years, right? Like I don't like change for change's sake. Single most important political reform in America today is the national popular vote interstate compact for the very reason that your question is grounded in, which is it will do more to increase participation than any reform on the horizon. And, if you say you're for participation, the debate should end there. You're for a national popular vote for president.
So let's play this out. Say
Okay.
in the next few years you get to 270, whatever kind of electoral
You
map
mean
that
when
looks.
we get to 270?
When you get to
Yeah,
270,
sure.
what does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, so interstate compacts are not like exotic things, right? We all are participating. No, I just want to make sure your listeners understand. I'm not explaining it to you. I'm just saying they're not exotic things. You know about a lot of them. You guys are in several interstate compacts in Massachusetts, right? One of them happens to be Powerball. Okay, so those are agreements among the states. Now, the reason 270 electoral votes is an important triggering mechanism, and every interstate compact has a triggering mechanism, is 270 electoral votes is a majority of the electoral college, which guarantees the presidency. Okay. So the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says that anytime states with 270 or more electoral votes have the compact in place on July 20th of a presidential year, it triggers. Now, July 20th is an important day. It's the start of the general election, right? The endorsing, it includes the conventions where you pick your candidates, general election, swearing in of the president, right? Because if your state's in it on July 20th of a presidential year and there are 270 electoral votes in it, they can withdraw, but their withdrawal cannot take effect for 6 months. It's in the compact. Now, when 270 electoral votes are in the compact on July 20th of a presidential year, those states, including your state of Massachusetts, my state of Minnesota, both our states are in it, right? By compact, those states will award their electors to the party of the candidate who wins the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So, for example, if we had 270 electoral votes in the interstate compact on July 20th, it would be the Republican electors from Massachusetts that would go and cast their electoral votes for Donald Trump because we're in the compact. So that's how it works. All 270 electors or more go to the candidate who wins the national popular vote winner. That's the trade-off for making sure that every voter in Massachusetts is relevant in a presidential election. That is the trade-off that the Massachusetts legislature, General Assembly, fully considered, fully understood, and believed was in the best interest of the country and the state of Commonwealth. I'm sorry, I almost called you a state. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I think they did that rightly because nobody cares. I can promise you they're not going to have a big electoral college night party up on Beacon Hill, right? Because the Democratic electors are casting Massachusetts ballots for Kamala Harris while Donald Trump is winning the electoral votes of the country. That's not where it matters is at the election. It matters that we're all relevant.
Is
And it
there
matters. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say, is there any like expiration or like date that
Nope.
you have to get this signed? So
Hey,
all the
look,
states that have signed so
yeah,
far are in it until it gets enacted.
unless they withdraw. So that's the beauty of an
Oh, sorry.
interstate
Got it.
compact, right?
Yeah,
Like a
yeah.
state can withdraw at any time, but there are no sunset clauses on it. So, for example, let's say I'm in the legislature in Minnesota and I believe, right? Like I believe the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, I would have voted for it as a Republican. I would have voted for it in the legislature. I would have thought it was the right trade-off to make Minnesota voters more relevant. And I think it's in the best interest of the country. So I would have voted for it, right? And we would have passed it, right? And let's say that we had a national popular vote for president and it went the way Brendan sort of described earlier, which is everybody was hunkering down in New York and Texas and right, like these four big states. Now, I don't think that's going to happen ever, right? But if it did happen and I was still in the legislature and it didn't make every voter in every state politically relevant in every presidential election, right? Which is the only reason I support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. and it didn't improve our politics, it made it worse, I would offer a bill to withdraw from the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and I would advocate for its withdrawal, right? That's the beauty. That's why I'm a Federalist, right? Like I would oppose a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. Now, the good news is I don't think there's a credible path to do that. I don't think it's the right way to do it. I don't change a city charter to fill a pothole. The power exists to have a national popular vote for president. So I never even talk about abolishing the Electoral College, which I think is great if you're into fundraising emails or something like that. But it's not a serious conversation at this point in time. If you want a national popular vote for president, like I do, like 65% of the American voters do, according to recent Pew surveys, including Republicans and Democrats and independents, 70% of voters 18 to 39 want a national popular. If you want one, there's one way to get it. Get on board. It's at nationalpopularvote.com. I mean, it's so simple, it's so basic, it's the right way to do it. So you could put a sunset clause on it in the legislature. Nobody has. Yeah, I don't think anybody has, and I guess I would know. So nobody has, but it doesn't need a sunset clause because you go in the same way you go out, which is a simple majority vote of your legislature. But let me promise you, there's nothing easy about or simple about a majority vote on an issue of, this magnet. I mean, it's not even magnitude anymore, though. I mean, the current system is such a disaster. I mean, I don't want to sound like my candidate for president, but it's such a disaster. I mean, it's so bad. It's like it doesn't do anything for anybody other than create controversy and actually rob American presidents of the bully pulpit. In my mind, there's I don't want to say like Donald Trump and George Bush were lawfully elected presidents of the United States, and I can promise you, every minute of every day, they had to defend their legitimacy, despite the fact that they were the legitimately elected president of the United States under a system that's a disaster. And I'm telling you, foreign adversaries are figuring out how to weaponize battleground state status against American presidents. They're doing it all the time. It's just, it doesn't, I can't, somebody's going to have to convince me there's a single redeeming quality to the current system.
All right, well, let me give you a hypothetical and
Sure.
understanding that these are hypotheticals. But say
Mhm.
in 2016, obviously President Trump wins the Electoral College but doesn't win the popular vote. Say Oklahoma was part of the Electoral Compact, right? I mean, you kind of pointed out the riots of 2020, or even if in this past election, if Massachusetts, which voted 61% for Kamala Harris, had to then go and give their votes to Donald Trump, like, isn't that in some ways inviting more trouble? Like, I can imagine here in Massachusetts that there would be outrage that after 61% of people in Massachusetts voted for Kamala Harris, all of our votes go towards President Trump. In some ways, that feels like we're disenfranchising people more.
Nah, you're making every voter in your state a battleground voter. You're making every voter in your state important with a national popular vote for president. The truth is the scenario that you lay out would never happen because you couldn't win the electoral college without winning the popular vote. Okay. So so for example, what you're saying about Oklahoma wouldn't happen because Oklahoma would know through the entire election that the candidate who wins the most popular votes in all 50 states is going to win 270 electoral votes in your hypothetical, including Oklahoma. They're going to know that the Oklahoma legislature is a part of that. And for the first time ever, every voter in Oklahoma is going to know that, oh my God, how much we win or lose Oklahoma now. If we can go from a 460,000 vote margin to a 730,000 vote margin for our candidate, and he wins the national popular vote, that's what they're going to be working on. They're not going to be thinking about it in any other way. The idea that the candidate with the most votes will be elected will not be controversial because the entire political system, the entire media system will be making sure that everybody knows, dude, if you care, you can no longer just focus on battleground states. I don't think you will see even a blip of controversy the first years of the national popular vote election. And I think it's because you're not going to see anybody celebrating the electors in Massachusetts going and casting their ballots for Kamala Harris in the middle of the December this year. They're going to be saying, oh, yeah, well, she won. They'll probably forget. They'll know that she won
Right.
Massachusetts. They knew she won Massachusetts. There would be pride in her winning Massachusetts on election night. Now the pride would be how much did we deliver to the national popular vote total? And that would be far more relevant to every American voter. Now, the reason I know it won't be crazy is because 65% of the people want it.
Mhm.
You know what, right? I mean, like if like 65% of the people want it. And what it would say is that the candidate who just got elected has the most votes. It'd be like this election, where it's like there's no controversy around who won the presidential election right now. You know why? Because the guy who won the election won the national popular vote. There's no controversy
Yeah,
around it.
but like the controversy in 2020, the guy that won the election won the popular vote, and there was the most controversy we've ever had.
Well, that's right, because it came down to razor thin majorities in court cases in 7 states. You're making my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a question about that's what I'm saying. There was nothing but divisiveness. There was nothing but chaos. There was nothing but controversy. And it's because it was all about what courts were going to decide was a valid ballot or not a valid ballot in Pennsylvania, in Georgia, because you have a state come down to 4,000 votes. There would have been none of that if the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact was in place. Now, I'm not saying that that's how that election would have ended up. Donald Trump probably would have campaigned to all 50 states in the District of Columbia. He would have changed the margins in that race. It might have looked more like tonight, right? It might have looked more like Tuesday night. I can't prove that or not prove that. All I know is it would be different. In NASCAR, I don't know. You guys don't do NASCAR in
I
Massachusetts.
was a big Dale Jr. fan, but I've
Okay,
been
but
out
in
since.
NASCAR,
Yeah.
remember when you used to drive to the points?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, you didn't drive to win every race.
right.
You drove to win enough points to win the
Yeah,
cup, right? So the rules of the game change. The way you play the game changes.
100%.
So bottom line is you're getting to my point, which is if you're telling me 2020 worked, that's why I say there's not a single redeeming quality to the current system, because all it did is create chaos. If Donald Trump had prevailed in his lawsuits, it would have been 4 years of riots in the streets. Why? Because there was a divergent election. So in the end, let's remove this divergent election thing, because I think Donald Trump has had it right the whole time, right? Which is if you let me campaign to every American voter, if you let me come up with a message of resonance that says, I hear you, right? Candidates like Donald Trump can win a popular vote for president. The reason I know that is because they just did, right? Now, I think candidates like Joe Biden can win a national popular vote for president if there's an incumbent president that hasn't done the job that the American people are looking for. And that's okay with me. That's okay. I'm not looking for a system that I win all the time. I'm looking for a system that delivers a better result, period. And I don't mean which candidate wins or loses, but I mean delivers a better politics, delivers a better, because look, 2020, this country, the fabric of our, like, honestly, the credibility of our governmental institutions have been in question with half of the American people for 4 years. And that's all because we look like a banana republic. Well, courts were deciding what was going to happen, and not a single voter was in. America works when voters are in charge. That's when it works. And sometimes the voters make some really bad decisions for me. Sometimes they make some really good decisions for me. And I mean, you don't like that, go live in Morocco. They got a great king. You know what I mean? They got an awesome king. I got no problem with Morocco and monarchies and all that other stuff. I choose not to live in one.
I mean, so I don't know about you, Brendan, but the case was kind of made for me before we even started. I vehemently think that this is. I mean, I've been long wishing that we could just do away with the electoral college without properly understanding that we had this other option. I think I still get back to my first question, but I want to maybe phrase it in a different way. Given the outcome of this election, particularly Donald Trump's gains among minority voters, does it kind of change your pitch a little bit? And so, like, I totally understand
Oh,
why
mine?
Republicans in New York would be interested in signing up for this compact, right? Their vote in New York doesn't mean anything. But in states like Texas, where you are getting like a little bit more, Democratic participation, maybe not in this election, but like, the trajectory has been there. But you've got
Yeah.
Republican dominated legislature, you got Republican everything everywhere else. Why, or, do you see maybe some of the demographic shifts as like a good moment in time to pitch to some of these Republican states that are holding out?
Well,
Or
it
is the
doesn't
story the same?
it doesn't change my pitch at all because my pitch has always been the pitch, and it doesn't change the nature of where I'm pitching. I've always been pitching to red states. I mean, the truth is what did they report on all of election night, right? They reported on a blue wall. Okay, so Donald Trump is the only Republican candidate that has threaded the needle in the blue wall now twice. And what you got to remember is 120,000 votes flip in 3 states on Tuesday. Donald Trump loses the election, wins the popular vote. 120,000 votes in 3 states, less than 20 votes per precinct, flip. Donald Trump just lost a divergent election, and everybody wants to talk about the 2 divergent elections, right? Well, let's talk about the 2 near misses. In 2004, John Kerry flipped 60,000 votes in the battleground state of Ohio. John Kerry's president of the United States, despite George W. Bush winning the popular vote by about 3.5, almost the same as Trump's going to end up winning it, probably, right? Somewhere between 3.5 and 4. So, I mean, divergent elections and near misses are bad for the political system, and they're bad for both parties. It just hasn't happened to go that way yet. But I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that. I don't know, when I was growing up in American politics, making decisions probably at way too young an age for people, but like when I was doing it, the battleground, was legitimately places like Colorado, New Mexico, you know what I mean? Virginia. And Virginia was interesting last night, but never really close. You know what I mean? It was close how it came in, but never close. I mean, nobody spent any time there. Uh, uh, those were Florida was a redder state than it is today, right? I mean, Arizona and Georgia weren't even on the map. You know what I mean? Those were clear red states. So it's not hard, but I'm not here for political calculus. I'm just saying if you actually think there's a structural advantage to Republicans under the current state-based winner-take-all system.
I don't, but I think
No,
it's
no,
clear
no,
that
no.
Republicans
I
do.
know. I'm not accusing you. I'm just
Yeah,
saying
yeah, no. But what I'm saying
if
is I think
you,
it's clear that
if
Republicans think
anybody,
it's
and I
true.
hear this from some of my friends, and I tell them, you know what I mean? And I know people in, conservative Republican electoral circles. My phone rings all the time from smart people who run these campaigns just because I trained a lot of them. I'm like, if you actually think there's a structural advantage of this system to Republicans, you're dumber than I thought you were. Now, it's not about the structural advantage or disadvantage, right? So my pitch isn't really different at all. It's just kind of obvious that Republicans. So there's this phrase, if you pay attention, it's called, what's the Republican path to the presidency? You know what I mean? Nobody ever talks about the Democratic path to the presidency, right? Because they got about, 230, 240 electoral votes locked in before we even start. We got a lot of states, they got a lot of votes, right? So, I mean, a Republican has always had to win 9 out of 11 battleground states. Trump won 7 out of 7 almost. You know what I mean? He did win 7 out of 7.
Yeah.
I think he'll end up winning 7 out of 7. But I mean, he had to do that to win.
Yeah.
So that's like, so in the end, but that's not my pitch. It's just like my pitch is, how's it going? My pitch is, look, do you really think we should be exporting political capital into battleground states while you're hemorrhaging your legislative majorities in presidential years, because all that money isn't, like, all of those resources aren't targeting your down ballot races? Don't you care about your precincts more than you care about a Michigan precinct? And I care about Michigan precincts, you know what I mean? And I think Michigan cares about Michigan precincts, and Michigan gets to care about Michigan precincts in a national popular vote for president. But in Oklahoma, don't you care about your precinct? Like in Massachusetts, wouldn't you rather make phone calls into your precincts, talking about your legislative races, your town council races, or whatever you got going on? You know what I mean? You're it's it's so the pitch is always the same pitch. It's always ripe everywhere. Do I believe it's riper today? Yeah, because I think my primary pitch has always been if you're not afraid of the voters, and if you're not afraid of your ideas, you're going to win and you can win. And I think it's easier now to have that conversation in red states because it was just proved.
Yeah.
But I will tell you in 2016, 2015, it was really easy to have that conversation in red states. We probably would have been House Bill 1 in about 7 red states, and then a divergent election happened. So, bottom line is I don't care. I always give the same pitch, and I got my shoulder to the wheel till this is done. And I am cautiously optimistic that we just lived our last race under a monstrosity of the system that really disenfranchised, really for out of getting back to my Federalist point earlier on. I mean, it is absolutely crazy that a Republican in Massachusetts would not support the national popular vote interstate compact. It's like if you're a Federalist, it's like, oh my God, you mean the state will use the power to make every voter in my state matter? Like that's like a no-brainer from a Federalist perspective. Same is true for a Democrat in Massachusetts too, though, right? Because your overvote's going to matter more in Massachusetts. Currently, you don't matter for Jack.
Well, Massachusetts is in the compact. Don't have to sell me on it.
No, I know. But I mean, this is how I have the conversation in Canada.
Yeah.
Now I have the conversation in Texas. Truth is I wouldn't be surprised if Texas comes to us.
Yeah.
Because you know what? We're tired of being ignored in presidential elections. We're the second biggest state. The truth is they don't want the federal government. And I understand that. Just because you're in the interstate compact doesn't mean you have to invite the federal government in. You continue to run your elections. You continue, but look, you'll get, I don't know, how quick could they get disaster relief to North Carolina 3 weeks ago? Pretty damn quick, right? Where was it slow? It was slow in Florida because they knew it was a flyover state, right? So disaster declarations happen 2 times faster, right? In a battleground state than a flyover state. So to me, it's not even about it. It is about the politics. It is about the better politics. It's about every voter mattering. It's about one person, one vote. But it's really about when that doesn't happen, we got this government for the battleground state of the battleground state, right? So what makes me sick to my stomach is the transactional policies. Like, look, Nevada tip credits. Don't get me wrong. I support tip credits. The only reason it was an issue in a presidential election is because Nevada's a battleground.
Yeah. Practically, once you get to 270, is that it? Like nothing else matters?
No. I think here's the deal. The truth is there are 270 or more electoral votes. Anytime they're in the compact on July 20th, it triggers. I think we'll go well over 270 once we reach 270 because people are going to like the new system. I mean,
but I'm saying is like if you have 270 on the July 20th of 2028,
the national popular vote interstate compact will take effect. There'll probably be one lawsuit around congressional consent. You know what I mean? And the court will determine whether it requires congressional consent or whether or not we have it already, which is way too complicated for this conversation. But trust me when I say I know the answer. The bottom line is like, if we have 270 electoral votes in the compact on July 20th or more, and it'll likely be a little bit more of 2028, we're going to have a national popular vote for president. You're going to be able to appeal to your friends and neighbors to vote in your own precinct, in your own state. And it's going to be, how do we talk now? It's going to be fantastic.
We've kept you longer than we promised that we were going to keep you. You've been incredibly generous. You mentioned a couple of times of where people could go if they wanted to find out more information about this issue. So can you plug those places once again?
Yeah, I would say that there's one place to go for information on the issue. That's nationalpopularvote.com. And the reason I say that is because it's just an information portal, and frankly, if you go to I would call it objection answer, but on the site it's called myth fact. but objection answer, we even raise every objection we've ever heard about our own idea and we answer it. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Just because we think people are entitled to information may slow us down a little bit, but bottom line is we think people are entitled to information. So it's a good place to go. It'll also point you to every other resource you could go to. And when you said I was a member of the Federalist Society, I mean, I've presented to several of them with opponents of the national popular vote bill. Actually, we mostly agree on almost everything other than this, and frankly, their arguments are lazy.
Well, thank you for taking this conversation full circle. Patrick Rosenstiel, Rosie. I feel like I can call you that now
Yeah,
that
you
we've had an
can.
hour
My friends call me
conversation.
Rosie. I'll let you decide. It's
Yeah,
up to you,
yeah.
man. We don't have to
Uh,
agree to be friends either.
for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time, perspective, expertise. This is awesome, super timely, and we appreciate so much that you've been so generous with your time.
Oh, really grateful to have the opportunity. Let
All
me know
right.
if you ever want to chat again.
Yeah, once you get to 270, we'll come back and hit you up. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll be
All right.
here.
All
All
right.
right. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Patrick. Yeah. Well, that was fun. As soon as we stopped recording, Patrick said, I'm by no means uncertain." He said, "Doesn't mean I'm right, but I'm very certain that about this topic." And you could just tell with not only his expertise, his knowledge, like in depth about all of the different aspects of this issue, but his passion. Like I always appreciate people that are so knowledgeable and so passionate. And like he said, he's a one-trick pony. He's dedicated like his kind of political life to doing for this cause because he really believes it's going to be better for our country, which I really appreciate. I think what's interesting, Ricky, is both of us kind of push back in different ways because even though they've had tremendous success, right? 17 states, as he said, uh, I think the idea does still seem radical to a lot of people of even if you're like 2016, you're a Democrat in the country, you're like, this is exactly what's wrong with our democracy is we're not kind of electing. This still seems to be this would be a seismic shift in how we elect our president. And so I think he answered a lot of the challenges pretty well. I'm not totally sure. I actually think he answered my challenges better than he answered your challenges. So how do you feel given like you try to push him on the fact that the 17 states that have signed up for this interstate compact are all traditionally blue states? Did are you satisfied with his answer?
Uh, well, I mean, I certainly appreciate sort of the consistency and the like moral clarity with which he approaches this position that really the national popular vote is in everybody's best interest. I think I at this point just cannot help but sort of be jaded by the current political process and everyone who is in charge of things seems to rather than promote everyone's personal and like everyone's collective interest, we look at what is in our individual interest. And I think he did a good job pointing out sort of the Kerry situation with a near miss that would have gone in the other direction. And honestly, had it happened, you might have had everything, passed by 2010, right? Or 2008, sorry. So, but because in the last 25 years, the only Republicans to win the popular vote were GW in his second election and now Trump in his second election, you can see the list of states. They're all Democrat states. And the problem, I think, is that there has been this great fear among Republicans that as new people enter the country, immigrants from, Latin America in particular, Hispanic Latino people, that the Democratic base will grow and the white vote will shrink. And so one of the ways that we cling to our power is through this more or less undemocratic system of the electoral college, which which is kind of why I was alluding to like, hey, as he was saying, there are times that Republicans can say all, our policies, our messaging is resonating with the majority, plurality of people in this country. We should be on board with this because there may be a time in the future where, the electoral map doesn't necessarily reflect the population there. But I like the I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if people who are advocating for this cause are picking up on that and saying like, look, we made inroads with Hispanic men, more than 50% of the vote. Like that was 10 years ago, never thought possible and thought it would never be possible for the next 20 years, right? Or 30 years. And we showed that it was possible in 2024. Let's 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 reap the benefits of all the other things that he's saying.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good question. I think I've railed against this since we started this podcast and well before of like demographics doesn't have to equal destiny. I think his point was kind of like if you have the best ideas, it shouldn't matter what the demographics look like. You should be confident that you can win the majority of the people. And maybe in that sense, like if you look at the map from this week, Ricky, like New Jersey was super close. New York was the closest it's been since I think Reagan, or maybe GW. I mean GHW. Some of these states, New Hampshire, Virginia. If you're a Republican, you're like, wow, we didn't even get credit for all of those votes. And of course, like you flip it the other way. Like you look at Texas, maybe Florida less so, but Georgia, North Carolina, like you don't get credit for like the millions of people you're turning out and voting for those candidates. I don't. I thought it was persuasive, Ricky. We spent a long time. He kind of like mocked ranked choice voting, which was like a dagger to my heart, and
Yeah,
also ranked choice voting like lost on every single ballot question across the states. I'm hitting, yeah, we're hitting our heads right now. Uh, but look, what have we consistently said is like things do seem to be kind of broken, and let's think about creative ways to fix them. And we've focused on some other measures. We talked about that with Larry Sharp too, but this isn't one that we've talked in depth about, and that's why I was glad to do it. I think he made a compelling case. Like I can't sit here and people can probably hear how skeptical I was because I'm not totally sure that I agree that I think it really would. There'd be like a lot of going to the coast and going to the cities and trying to turn people out in the biggest population centers. Like I do think time is a finite resource for campaigns and candidates. And like what you have to do is you have to go to the places where you can kind of get the best bang for your buck. And those are going to be like the biggest population centers. But it would be fascinating to see like a Harris spending time in New York City and LA and Chicago and Houston versus Trump going to out in Ohio and Kansas and Mississippi, whatever. Like maybe they're just campaigning in two different places. Like I think that strategy wise would be fascinating to see. I'm not sure that I really believe that, but whatever. My kind of overall final point with this is he gave me a lot to think about. Like legitimately, this was not something that I seriously entertained before this conversation. And I realized like it's like whenever you see a documentary, Ricky, you're like you come away being like, oh, well, I believe what the author just wanted, but then you have to be like, oh, well, I believe that because that's exactly what the author wanted me to believe walking away from this. So I'm gonna give this some time to marinate, but I really appreciated how strongly and intelligently he advocated for that position.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree, and I am really interested in right elevating the importance and the value of individual votes. I think I was in like trying to do a little research for this. I I've known how we proportion electors and House of Representative seats and Senate seats, whatever, like in theory, but I've never really thought about it like, oh, the House is kind of done by population and the Senate, every state gets two. And I started looking into just to like get a sense of what was going on. California, 38 million people, has I don't know if you know this off the top of your head. You
54.
probably would. 54 electoral college votes. So and 52 House seats and two uh, and two Senate seats, obviously. How many states do you think the next, like, from the bottom lowest populous to all the way up to number one, how many of those states populations do you think could fit in the state of California?
11?
21. So 38 million people, the next
Oh,
21,
populations.
sorry, by population.
Oh,
Yes,
okay.
okay, by delegates, it's probably more like 11 because those 21 states that combined have the same population of California
Oh
have
yeah.
92 electoral votes between them, right? So that is
Yeah.
insane.
People like the like Wyoming, like the people in Wyoming, their vote matters more, like proportionally more, like because something like 10, 20, 50 times more than a vote in California.
Right, right, exactly. Because, I mean, beyond the fact that we're talking about the president and their three electoral college votes are going to go to whoever, and that already is an outsized proportion relative to their 600, sub 600,000 people that live in the state of Wyoming. then they have two senators plus a member in the House, which again, 600,000 people, that is the population of the city of Boston. So it's wild to think about how kind of crazy and like realistically like undemocratic. You hear so often about these like the policies that are coming out of California. Like in a weird way, probably more policies should be coming out of California because they represent 10%, over 10% of the US population in one state. And by the way, to his point, there are a lot of Republicans that live in California. And they also are like completely disenfranchised in the same way that the Democrats are. So it is, I think there's a lot of merit to that overall. And I think one of the questions you had that I know probably a little bit over time on this topic, but one of the questions you had that I thought was interesting is wouldn't something like 2016, which, to his point, if all the rules work like that, you'd never have that situation. I think the thing that was more interesting in 2020 was that while people knew the Electoral College is how we pick the president, I don't think anybody was really that in tune to like, oh no, a state like sends delegates with their electors to go like physically say who their state is and how the apportionment of their electors are going. And so like the and in some ways it was like better when nobody did know and everyone was like, oh, these are the rules, and we were good with it. And then all of a sudden they were like, no, you can go up there and you just change whatever you want. You just put in your electors. Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think there might have been that kind of controversy, but maybe if it is like, hey, these are the rules and the politicians are playing to those rules and going to all 50 states, well, they would probably skip Wyoming given what we just said. But yeah, you might hear some more or you there I think there is a little bit more credibility in the way the system plays out. Because at least you'd be part of the process, like start to finish. It's not just you show up on election night, cast your vote, your state votes the same way for the last 200 years. So you didn't feel like you did anything. And then, whatever happened, happened. I think that that's interesting. And like you said, you kind of change the game, change the rules of the game, you change the way the game is played.
Yeah.
And it's worth doing if we can just shake things up a little bit and see how that turns out. Yeah. Whew. His rants inspired one of mine. Yikes. Here we go.
That's good. Like
Anyways,
passion leading to more passion.
yeah. All right. Well, I suppose we can leave it there.
Yes. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Patrick for his time. We'd be super curious if people have thoughts. Please reach out to us on Instagram or and if you have our numbers, reach out to us directly. We This is a really interesting topic, a really interesting conversation. I'm super curious what people think about this.
Yeah. Likewise. All right. Till next time, buddy.
I'll see you.
What I wouldn't give for the hope I used to find in a case of lion's head. Folks of different minds, because even though it did not share the pains we share, that American ideal, friends made over arguments in an early morning buzz. Need an early morning buzz.